A good horror film builds from
No.
a core of fear.
To find a film that's in a genre like this, a horror film, which actually
Honors the genre.
yeah,
Yeah.
and honors human beings as people in a dilemma, but real people in a real dilemma, was really exciting for me.
The Plague is horror, but I would call The Plague a psychological, spiritual horror, probably, if that's, I don't think that's a section in the video store. The film has that, what I like is that kind of 70s canvas, I guess, the color palette, and it looks, clearly immediately you can tell it just looks different than a movie you would, if you were just picking up The Plague off the video shelf, you could immediately tell it just does not look like the $1.98 straight-to-video horror movie that they kept kind of put together.
I think it's the gift of all filmmakers to leave people with something that's not total, well, not pablum per se, but something that forces people to be uncomfortable, forces them to think, to analyze an aspect of the movie which is possibly reflected in themselves, in society. Art is what makes us think.
What Teal and I wanted to do was figure out what for us was a social issue, a social fear that existed today, and to try and make a horror film that, wasn't a throwback to the 70s or the 40s or something like that, but approached the horror genre from a same kind of thinking, where it's like, what is something that's going on in society today that is frightening, that is confusing, that is an already existing fear that we could tap into and explore. And for us, it ended up being kids and violence and the world, how we solve problems with violence, or think we can solve problems with violence.
What we saw in the entire history of horror films, from 1922 or so on, is that they always reflected some fear, some deep thing in the national or international psyche.
The Plague Writers and Director's Cut is very important for me to have out there in the world for several reasons. One, the obvious reason, it's the film I set out to make. So, of course I want it to be seen by an audience. The other reason is the actors that put their time and energy into the film, the crew that put their time and energy into the film. I felt like a lot of the actors on the movie chose to do it. Take Dee Wallace, for example, because she connected to the material, because she felt like this was a story that she wanted to be a part of, that she wanted out there in the world.
All of the things that drew me to the script and the project are in this version. The commentary about the fear and how it's worked through all of society, and the very poetic statement that's made at the end of the film. And there's so many more personal character developments and heart and layers in this particular cut of the film. To me, it's a different film.
I believe that this version is a richer version than the other version. And so not only do I care for it more, like it more, want people to see it for that reason, it's also quite useful to compare. And why not? Because you can fit it on a DVD now. Let's do it.
In the writer's and director's cut, I just like the transitions are much more effective to me. They have more metaphoric value. They're more powerful. The end is very scary and cool and has a neat arc and is edited much more rhythmically and more appropriately in the director's cut than in the other version.
It really does have characters that are more rounded, and it also is better resolved, and I respect that. I respect that the filmmakers care and respect the audience.
I don't think this is a horror film as most horror films are now. I think it's a real tribute to the writing and performing and shooting of the horror film as it should be in its purest sense.
It's going for something much higher and elevated. It's going for something much different. So the director's cut, to me, should be marketed much more to a different audience that's going to appreciate its more psychological qualities and not think they're just going to see a killer kid movie, which is clearly how the producers kind of would like the film to be.
It's the old saying of, sitting around a campfire and you have someone who's a really great storyteller telling a story, and you have someone who speaks in a monotone voice and tells the same story. There's a big difference between how that story affects you, and that's going to be partially up to the audience to decide whether it's a good storyteller telling the story or not.